Wow. First of all, Zoe, thank you for that wonderful introduction. Yeah. I do love the point that you made, Zoe, linking our sort of common heritages. My father's parents were Holocaust survivors. My father was a first-generation college student at Rutgers, first person in his family to go to college. And now I teach undergrads at Rutgers, and I see a lot of students just like you who are first generation now. So it's that cycle of opportunity that you get at schools like Rowan or Rutgers or many others. Now that said, one thing that I want everyone to understand about my resume is I am a product of the New Jersey public school system. And let me just be specific, okay? Kindergarten to second grade, Osage Elementary School in Voorhees, New Jersey. Third through sixth grade, Woodcrest Elementary School in Cherry Hill, New Jersey. Seventh and eighth grade, Beck Middle School. Yeah, those were kind of rough years. 9th through 12th, high school, Cherry Hill High School East, yes. And college, of course, at Rutgers College in New Brunswick. Oh, come on. And look, Rutgers and Rowan have similar missions. We are here to serve the people of New Jersey and to help primarily the residents of this state, but beyond, have those opportunities to improve themselves, improve their family standing, and to move up in the world. And so I think Rutgers and Rowan do share that bond. I did sell out for law school. I'll cop to that, I guess, and went non-public for that. I am very much a South Jersey kid. In fact, this is even South for me, though, I have to say. This is like we're even with Baltimore here. But there's one word that I sometimes say on air, and whenever I say it, I hear from people and they go, what is your accent? What is that? Where are you from? Or they know where I'm from. So what is that one word? I don't say it much, but it comes up sometimes. What's the one word where you go, that guy's from South Jersey? Anyone? You got it. You all got it. Water. Yeah, water. So I'll say, well, back in Watergate. And they'll go, what's Watergate? Or, it's water under the bridge. So yes, that's fun. I did not expect people to get that as much as they did. So thank you for having me. Dr. Dworkin, thank you. Thank you to the staff here. This is a wonderful event. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit tonight about my career, and then we'll talk about what's happening in the world. But as has been stressed, and I like to stress this, there are eyewitnesses here to the fact that I was a prosecutor. One time I was a real lawyer. But when I was a prosecutor, we were trained and brainwashed that the media was the enemy, right? I was trained at the Justice Department. If you ever get a call from media, and we did, you hang up the phone. You don't even politely refer them to the press office. Just hang up the phone. And so I always saw the media as the enemy. Now I realize that I've fully converted to the dark side. And I do have this awkward moment that will happen sometimes when I'm talking to my friends who are prosecutors then or prosecutors now, and maybe we'll be at a bar having a drink, and 10 or 20 minutes in, they'll always go, we're off the record, right? Like, don't worry, this isn't interesting enough for me to report on. But I understand we are on the record tonight. I know this is being recorded, so I will act accordingly. I knew I had this moment where I realized I had fully crossed over. About a year into when I started at CNN, I had to meet a producer, and she said, well, meet me outside the HMU. And I'm thinking, okay, what on earth is the HMU? Now understand, I came from 14 years as a prosecutor where we had the most badass acronyms you can imagine. JTTF, the Joint Terrorism Task Force, HIDTA, the High Intensity Drug Trafficking Area, OCDEF, organized crime, right, all this stuff. So that's what I'm used to. And so I said to this producer, what's the HMU? And she goes, oh, the hair and makeup unit. I said, okay, I'm in a different world now. So I was a real lawyer once. I'm not exactly sure what I am now. When you apply to college, you all know this, my kids just applied to college, you have to say what your parents do. Like there's a pull-down menu, right? Which seems weird to me that they asked that. But my daughter said, what do I put for you? And I said, I don't know, is there miscellaneous or something? So I don't know exactly what I do, but I was indeed a real lawyer once. Media was never part of the plan. This happened purely by accident. But I still do think about the world oftentimes, certainly from a lawyer's point of view, sometimes from a prosecutor's point of view. And I find that the skills carry over quite well, because the core task of what you're trying to do in media is really the same thing that you're trying to do as a trial lawyer, as a prosecutor. In both instances, you're trying to take a large, complex set of facts and boil them down to a place where your audience, whether it's a jury of your peers or the defendant's peers or the audience watching on TV, can understand what the heck you're saying, can care about it, and can want to be on your side. Okay? It's the same fundamental skills. I will say, people have asked me, what's harder, to cover a trial or to actually do a trial? And I've done plenty of both now. And I'll tell you the answer, a definitive answer, a non-hedged answer. It is 1,000 times harder to try a case than to cover a case. When we had the Trump trial happening 2 years ago, I was working around the clock. I was doing 9 to 4 in DC, getting on the train up to New York, arriving in New York at 6:48, doing our night show 8 to 10, getting picked up at 10:15, driven back to DC, getting back there at 2 a.m. and repeating. Let me tell you, that is a picnic compared to actually trying a case where you're going 23 hours and, for me, not eating and not sleeping and anything like that. The biggest difference is really just as a practical matter in the time constraints, because when you're giving a jury address, you will have, if it's a closing in a big case, you might have 2 hours, 2.5 hours, 3 hours, hour and a half, whatever. On TV, they will call me and say, okay, this 82-page indictment just dropped. How quick can you get in front of a camera, and can you explain the whole thing in 3.5 minutes? I'm like, yeah, I can do that. But as a result of that, we developed certain shorthands, certain phrases that we like to use in the media. And so what I want to do tonight is present to you a list of 5 of these shorthands, 5 of these phrases that you will never hear me use on air. And as we'll see, there's reasons for that. But I want to give you a lawyerly disclaimer before I get into them, which is if you happen to dig up some old footage of me from a few years ago, and I might be saying one of these phrases, I've changed and I've grown. Okay, so, and this is all based on my actual work as a prosecutor. Phrase number 1 you will never hear me say on air. It's a smoking gun, or it's a slam dunk case. Okay? It's tempting to do this when an indictment drops because it sounds cool, because it's definitive. You're saying, oh, this is it, smoking gun. But let me tell you, I spoke last week at a convention of prosecutors and defense lawyers. I said, every person in this room knows if you've ever stood in front of a jury trial, it's never that simple. Where there is a smoking gun, you're not even on trial. You get a plea. So it's overly simplistic. I'll give you 2 examples, okay? Number 1, who remembers the phone call that was recorded between Donald Trump and the Secretary of State in Georgia, Brad Raffensperger, in January, right? Okay, most people. And what's the famous line that Donald Trump says to Brad Raffensperger, and you've heard it 10,000 times? You got it. I just want you to find me 11,780 votes. People look at that and they go, that's it. He's guilty. Smoking gun. Let me ask you something about that transcript. That's 1 sentence. How long is that phone call? Anyone know how long is that phone call between Donald Trump and Brad Raffensperger? It's 62 minutes. Okay, the transcript is several hundred pages long. Let me read a couple of them. And by the way, as we'll get to later, I'm not defending Donald Trump. I'm showing you that this is not a smoking gun. 2 things that Donald Trump says on that call that you don't hear people talk about that any good defense lawyer would certainly feature. Quote, people should be happy to have an accurate count. Also, quote, I want to have the votes counted as they are. Okay, little more tricky now, right? Prosecutors with your smoking gun, it's not quite as smoking. Any defense lawyer that I know out there, any good one, would tear that apart. It's a good, don't get me wrong, it's a good piece of evidence for a prosecutor, but it ain't a smoking gun. I'm going to give you another more recent example. The indictment of Sean Combs. We all know who this is? I hate saying Diddy on air. I feel silly. I always try to say Mr. Combs or Combs, but Diddy, okay? What was the piece of that indictment when it came out a couple years ago that everyone said, oh my God, all the late night hosts? Well, put aside the video. The video's bad, okay? But the video's not a federal crime. The video is a state crime, but he's charged federally. But what's the detail that all the late night comedians had fun with and laughed about and had a good laugh? Anyone remember? You got it. I could see you were hesitant. She was like, can I say this? 1,000 bottles of baby oil. And he's so guilty, he's so screwed, baby oil. Let me tell you something. Baby oil, maybe it's a nice piece of evidence. Baby oil, I don't care if you have 10,000 bottles, that's not racketeering. And I said at the time that this case feels to me like it's overcharged. And I say this as somebody who has charged RICO cases And one of my partners from the FBI who knows that is here tonight. And sure enough, that case was overcharged. And the jury found him not guilty of racketeering. They found him guilty on lesser offenses. But people said, baby oil, oh man, he's done. Not always a smoking gun. Okay, number one. Number two, phrase that you will not hear. This one I'm sure I've never said on air. Oh, it's his hand-picked fill in the blank. His hand-picked attorney general. His hand-picked U.S. attorney. His hand-picked Supreme Court justice, right? Sounds sinister. Sounds like it's cronyism. How do we think our system works? How do we think presidents choose justices and AGs and cabinet members? Yeah, hand-picked, whatever that means. What do you think? They spin a random lottery wheel and pick whoever's name comes out? Of course they hand-pick them. Now, I'll tell you something that I sort of have thought about and struggle a little bit with in media. When I was at the Justice Department, we had the luxury of not knowing or caring what president appointed the judges we appeared in front of. If you gave me a list of all 40 or so federal judges in the SDNY and said, tell me which president appointed which judge, I'd be guessing on every one of them. It just didn't come up. It didn't matter. You didn't care if it was a Clinton or Bush or Reagan or, what it was. This is pre-Trump appointee. It just didn't matter. Now in the media, sometimes when I'm on air, I'm writing, I'll say, well, the judge who accepted this or rejected this was a Trump nominee or a Bush nominee or an Obama nominee. And people sometimes get mad and they go, that doesn't matter because judges are just judging it fair and down the middle. I don't know. I disagree. I think it's relevant to you, the viewer and the audience who appointed a judge. And I'll give you an example. 2 or 3 weeks ago, Donald Trump lost the tariff case, right? You all know about this. Isn't it relevant to you as viewers that the 6 justices who voted against him, 3 of them were conservatives, 2 of them were justices who Trump himself had appointed? Isn't that relevant? Wouldn't it have been, right? I'll give you another example. There was a motion made in Minneapolis when all the ICE craziness was happening there, where the Minnesota AG and the mayor and the governor filed this lawsuit to throw ICE out of Minnesota. And the judge who rejected that lawsuit, would it matter to you if that was a Trump judge or a Biden judge? As a viewer, would you want to know that? Would it matter? Of course. That was a Biden judge, and that's relevant. So it feels a little bit against my training as a prosecutor, but I think it's absolutely relevant. Now, I don't like the implication that whatever president put that judge on the bench, they're always going to rule that way or in favor of that party or that political view. It's not that simple. People oversimplify that, but I do think it's a relevant piece of information. Okay. Phrase number 3 you will never hear me say on air. What's he hiding? What's he hiding? Okay, defense lawyers really appreciate this. I actually spoke at a defense group a couple months ago, and they like this part. So, he's taking the 5th. What's he hiding, right? Look, taking the 5th Amendment is your constitutional right and my constitutional right. And I reject it when people say, he's taking the 5th. He must be guilty of something. And look, let's be honest, people had a lot of fun shoving that in Donald Trump's face when he took the 5th. Granted, Donald Trump somewhat invited that because he had previously said that anyone who takes the 5th is a gangster and guilty and all that. That's fine. But people said, he's taking the 5th, he must be guilty. You know who else took the 5th? 2 senior members of Jack Smith's prosecutorial team. They were questioned by Congress, and they took the 5th dozens and dozens of times. Are they criminals? No. They're exercising their 5th Amendment right. It might turn out people have done something bad, but taking the 5th itself is not enough. I'm going to use one of my dad's favorite quotes. It's a little bit dated. But if people have seen Fiddler on the Roof, the play or the movie, right? There's a moment where they're talking about being poor, and the lead character, Tevye, says something like, well, there's no shame in being poor. It's no great honor, but there's no shame. And I kind of feel the same about the 5th Amendment. There's no shame in taking it. It's not a great honor to take the 5th, but it doesn't necessarily have to be the shame. Same thing with whenever people who are charged with crimes try to resist subpoenas, right? Or try to delay or get an adjournment, get more time. That is standard stuff that happens all the time. That's usually defense lawyers doing their job. If you think someone who fights a subpoena, as Donald Trump did, is doing something bad, guess who just fought a subpoena and almost got held in contempt? Bill and Hillary Clinton, right? They got subpoenaed in the Epstein case. They no-showed. They were held in contempt by the House Oversight Committee, and then they went in. So there's nothing. You are entitled to fight a subpoena if you want. Doesn't mean you're guilty. Okay. Number 4. It's unprecedented therefore we can break the rules. Or it's unprecedented, therefore we can do something different than we normally do it. So let me explain this one. It is perfectly normal and productive for us in the media to point out if something is indeed unprecedented. This has never happened before. We are all guilty of overusing that phrase, unprecedented. I will plead to that on behalf of everyone in the media. But where I draw, and you will see the word unprecedented, there's plenty of stuff I do. But what I'm saying here is where you say, yes, we're departing from what we would normally do, but it's okay because it's unprecedented. And I'm going to give you 2 examples. Okay, this part, hold on for this one. The Epstein files, okay? The fact that we have made the Epstein files public, just crap. I mean, DOJ has done a horrible job of this. They've over-redacted, under-redacted. They were late on the deadline. It's been a disgrace the way they've handled it. And they're only doing it because a specific law was passed by Congress. This is a horrible precedent to say we're going to take hundreds, thousands, millions of documents from closed or pending DOJ criminal investigative files, and we're going to make them public. Why? Because politicians are being opportunistic, because there's a massive amount of public interest, because it's unprecedented. We've never seen a sex trafficking ring quite like this one, which, by the way, is wrong. The Epstein case is very, very bad. There have been plenty of other cases. I've done some that are similarly or worse than the Epstein case, okay? Now, what's my objection? Why do we ordinarily, people out there, I know there's prosecutors and FBI agents and defense lawyers in this audience. Why is it that we don't just go opening up our criminal files? Beyond, obviously, look, if you're going to indict someone, you indict them. You put it on the record, you make your case, you go into court, you put your evidence in. But why are we not opening it up to all the notes that were taken, all the interviews, all the recordings, all the photos? What are we worried about? Okay, oh good.
I'm not a law student, but I guess actively breaking the laws that we have in place.
Yeah, well, a couple things. Okay, think about it both ways. From the prosecutor's point of view, it is anathema to what we do to accuse people of things or to damage or destroy people's reputations, careers, if you're not going to criminally charge them. Indict or shut up. That is our mantra, that is our ethic. And so if we're going to, trust me, if all the criminal files I ever did became public, you'd have a lot of people out here who've never been charged with crimes, who may have been accused of something, who may have been mentioned in passing, who may have done something wrong but not charged, who may have done nothing wrong but been wrongly accused of something. It leads down a very dangerous path. And from the defendant's point of view, it prejudices the defendant's right to a fair trial. If the public is able to go through and say, let me see all the dirt, let me see everything bad that's ever been said about this person, let me see every allegation, how is that defendant going to get a fair trial? Go ahead and try to serve a FOIA, a Freedom of Information Act request on any federal prosecutor, Oprah here in New Jersey, the State Open Public Records Act. The response will always be, your request is rejected. We don't do that. It's against the law. It's against ethics. They're not breaking the law with the Epstein Files case because there is a specific Epstein Files law. It's a mistake. And more people, I think, are saying this. I know we love accountability. I know we love transparency. And I will tell you, when these files came out, I was first in line. As a member of the media, I want to see them. As a member of the public, I want to see them. But from the perspective of our criminal justice system, this is a bad road we're heading down. And the fact that we just said, well, but this case is extra bad, therefore we're going to depart from what we normally do, is a way you make a mistake. That's one example. I'll give you another example. The aforementioned lawsuit in Minneapolis. So things sometimes happen where a big story will drop while you're on air, and you have to be ready. And so I was on air that night when the Minnesota AG and governor and mayor of Minneapolis filed this lawsuit saying, federal judge, we want you to throw ICE out of Minneapolis. They cannot do their business here. And the anchor turned to me, Anderson Cooper turned to me and said, do these lawsuits have any chance of succeeding? Now, I was very critical of ICE for what they did in Minnesota and Minneapolis. I think they did all sorts of damage, et cetera. But I said, these lawsuits will fail. And they did. And why? The next day we had the Attorney General on, and the question the anchor asked the Attorney General was, what legal authority is there for a judge to tell a federal law enforcement agency you cannot enforce federal law in a certain state or city? And the AG knew that his legal position was ridiculous. And so he said, well, this is just more than we've ever seen before. This is a surge. This is unprecedented. This is more ICE conduct that we've ever seen. And that showed you that he knew he was in the wrong. Because if you just say, well, this is extra bad, so we're going to break the rules, we're going to do something different. Now, he lost. That was the case that was rejected by the Biden judge. Relevant, I think, to know. So again, it's unprecedented, but it's okay because this situation factually is a little different or worse than before. Not popular, but I think that's a mistake when we go down that path. And then my last one is, and I hear this a lot, if something doesn't happen, then our democracy dies. Right? People say this all the time. I wish I had kept the current list of all the times. People on both sides said, if this case comes out this way, our democracy is over. We've lost our democracy both ways. Look, there's no question our democracy right now is facing new and urgent challenges. The damage that has been done to our rules, our rule of law, our norms by this Justice Department, by Pam Bondi, by Donald Trump, by Todd Blanche has been incalculable. This, however, has played out over the last 8+ years. My first book was a criticism of Bill Barr, who was AG during Trump's first term. Then, during the next 4 years, when Biden was president, I was not always, but largely critical of some of the things that prosecutors did in their pursuit of Donald Trump. Now, let me say this. Donald Trump should have been indicted for the classified documents. He probably should have been indicted for trying to steal the 2020 election. But you cannot have integrity, have intellectual integrity, and tell me that there was no prosecutorial overkill with respect to Donald Trump, that everything that was done to him was valid. You cannot tell me that the lawsuit brought by Letitia James, the Attorney General of New York, was valid. That thing has now been thrown out by a liberal appeals court in New York. She ran for office saying, vote for me and I'll nail Donald Trump. Are you okay with that? Is anyone okay with that? Are you okay with the Republicans saying, vote for me, people of New Jersey, and I'll nail Cory Booker? Just picking a Democrat out of that. Would you be okay with that? Absolutely not. You can't be okay with it the other way. Alvin Bragg, good friend of mine. I've known Alvin since law school. Colleagues at the Southern District of New York, Manhattan DA. The case that he brought against Donald Trump, that hush money case, was a debacle. That case is going to be thrown out on appeal legally. The star witness, Michael Cohen, an admitted perjurer, an admitted fraudster who liberals embraced. Why? Because he's telling on Trump. A few weeks ago, Michael Cohen came out and said, I was pressured by those prosecutors to tell the testimony the way they wanted it. And what did liberals say to Michael Cohen? Shut up, we don't want to hear you. They fired him from the agency, from the Midas Touch where he works at. Nobody wanted to hear it. That case was a debacle. And if you like that case, it helped propel Donald Trump back to the presidency, because this hush money deal that he did 9 years ago was so trivial compared to January 6th, compared to classified documents. It should have been 2 federal prosecutions, 1 on classified documents, 1 on January 6th, and that's it. All this piling on backfired. And I told people it backfired. They didn't want to hear it. This is my second book. The theme of my second book is everyone's telling you Donald Trump's going to prison, get the orange jumpsuit ready. I'm here to tell you that it's not going to happen. It's not going to be nearly as easy. People don't want to hear it. My rule of doing this job, I don't play politics. You cannot base your analysis based on who's on the other side of that versus sign. Okay? You look at what the prosecutors did. I don't care if your defendant is Hunter Biden. I don't care if your defendant is Joe Biden. I don't care if it's Bill Clinton. I don't care if it's Donald Trump. You have to assess it fair and the same each way. And sometimes that doesn't happen in the media. And I will tell you, I had other prosecutors I worked with who were supervisors of mine who were cheerleading some of the stuff that was done against Donald Trump. And in private, behind closed doors, they would go, oh yeah, I would never have done this. I would have fired anyone who did this. So I refuse to play that game. Now, let me reserve some words here for this DOJ. What is happening now, this overt, explicit politicization of DOJ, is a break in the historical chain. And in my book, I go back to Watergate. What we are seeing now is different in kind from anything we've seen before, and worse than anything we've seen before. We have the president explicitly posting on social media, I want you to indict Letitia James. Listen, you can tell I'm not a fan of Letitia James. I just did a segment on CNN from Rowan where I said these prosecutions of Letitia James are outrageous, okay? Prosecute Letitia James, prosecute Adam Schiff, prosecute Jim Comey. And then you have the Attorney General responding in public, yes, sir, we're on it. It's outrageous. It's against everything that prosecutors ought to be about. And if you want the perfect visual tableau for this, there is now a literal banner, 3 stories high, hanging over the Justice Department headquarters of Donald Trump. It's a massive I don't know, 50-foot high banner of Donald Trump hanging over DOJ's headquarters. This is anathema to everything that DOJ is about. This is the opposite of independence. One of our reporters posted this on her Instagram, and I texted her, I said, are you sure that's not that may be AI, that may be fake. She's like, I'm looking at it right now, I'm across the street. So, okay, it's real. But I honestly, genuinely didn't believe. There are moments like that where, as much as Donald Trump breaks norms, there was just one the other day when Robert Mueller passed away, who I write about in the book, who, whatever one may think of his investigation, is an American hero. And Donald Trump, I don't want to give it too much oxygen, but you saw Donald Trump's disgusting remarks. I actually thought that was fake. I didn't believe that until I saw it, but it's real. There is a literal banner of Donald Trump hanging over DOJ. Why is this a problem? This maybe is stating the obvious. First of all, it violates any notion that prosecution must be independent. And one thing that I was born and raised on over my 14 years as a prosecutor is that prosecution must be independent of politics. The other thing, and this is what I just talked about on my segment an hour or two ago, it doesn't even work. Look at DOJ's record on these cases. They're losing it every turn. A judge threw out the Jim Comey case. A judge threw out the Letitia James case. They tried to re-indict Letitia James. A grand jury rejected it. They tried to re-indict Letitia James. A grand jury rejected it. Last week, a judge quashed, meaning blocked, subpoenas that Trump had tried to serve on the Fed, or not Trump, but Jeannie Pirro had tried to serve on the Fed. None of these cases is working. They're backfiring. I do wonder when, if ever, this administration will get tired of the losing. So I want to be clear, what's happening now at DOJ is brand new and is different than anything that we've seen in the past. Now, a couple of closing things. There's no question that this president is seeking to expand presidential powers beyond what any, I'll just speak for recent history, has done. And there's no question that he has at times succeeded and that the courts have at times blessed or enabled or helped him to expand executive powers, right? We're seeing all sorts of new precedent made by the Supreme Court, for better or worse. But it's also important to keep in mind that the courts and prosecutors and the justice system and grand juries and judges are doing substantial work to check some of those runaway abuses. People say it's easy and it's glib and it's a nice soundbite to say, the Supreme Court, the courts let Donald Trump do whatever he wants. That's just not true. Yes, there's some opinions that you may disagree with. There's some I disagree with. But let me just give you a quick rundown. And by the way, I would argue that the courts and the judiciary have been the most effective check on this attempt to expand executive power. Okay, Donald Trump targeted all these law firms, right? You all know about this. Universities. Every one of those law firms and universities who had the courage to stand up and fight has won in the courts. The courts have blocked Donald Trump from going after those universities and those law firms. The ones that bent the knee and settled, they're going to have other questions to answer. I mean, they, to me, embarrassed themselves in the profession and undermined their universities. But the ones who fought went to court and they won. Judges ruled against Trump. They stopped them from doing that. And those universities and those law firms prevailed. Doge, gosh, remember Doge? Whatever happened to those guys? Some, not all, but some of the firings under Doge, Trump's efforts to withhold federal funding have been blocked by the courts. The courts have rejected that. Not all, but some. The National Guard. Why is the National Guard not out patrolling the streets of Chicago right now? Because the Supreme Court blocked them. A couple months ago, the Supreme Court said that is unconstitutional, and the National Guard got pulled off the streets of Chicago. Improperly appointed U.S. attorneys. We're in New Jersey. We've had a mess of this. There's another one in Virginia. There's another one upstate New York. There's another one in California. All the courts that have been presented with these cases have ruled against Donald Trump, have said that U.S. attorney, whether it's Alina Habba here in New Jersey, Lindsay Halligan in Virginia, improperly appointed, they're out. Another check on presidential powers. The efforts to indict and prosecute Jim Comey, rejected by a court. Letitia James, rejected by a court and grand juries. Mark Kelly, the great senator from Arizona. I say great because I think he's a veteran, he's an astronaut, he's a remarkable human being. The effort to indict Mark Kelly and Alyssa Slotkin, rejected by a grand jury. Again, a check. I'm not saying it's perfect, but a check on presidential powers. Tariffs. Tariffs struck down by the Supreme Court a couple weeks ago. He can try again, but he's got to go back through the courts. So it'll take work. But our democracy is going to survive this. We are going to live well beyond our 250 years that we're on right now. We are going to have an election in 2028. Donald Trump is not going to be a candidate in 2028. He's not going to seize the voting machines with ICE or something like that. I'm not saying there's not signs for concern. There are things being done with regard to elections that I think are problems. We are going to have a country long beyond this. And let me just close before I take your questions with a story that I love from my book. So what I do in the book is I speak firsthand with, I think the final number was 37 people who were firsthand involved in these prosecutions of presidents, from Watergate, South Jersey, to Iran-Contra, to Bill Clinton and Ken Starr, to all the modern ones, Robert Mueller, Jack Smith, on down the line. And it was so fun and interesting for me as a prosecutor to talk. I talked to prosecutors, I talked to defense lawyers, I talked to the legal teams for Trump, for Biden, for Hunter Biden, for the Clintons, you name it. I talked to White House officials, I talked to defense lawyers, I talked to some people who were actually prosecuted. One of my favorite chapters in the book is really the first big chapter about Watergate. And I spoke with two people who were on the Watergate prosecution team. Jill Wine-Banks, if people watch MSNBC, do they know who Jill is? She's a commentator with MSNBC now. Jill, at the time, in the early 70s, was a 30-year-old prosecutor on the Watergate team. She was actually the only woman on the team. Her memoirs are titled The Watergate Girl, because that's what she was known as. And Jim Quarles, who was 26 years old at the time. Now you can do the math, right? They're plus 45 years or whatever it is. And people know about the Saturday Night Massacre, right? People know what this is, just for people who may not. Nixon started to get scared by this investigation. It was closing in on him. And he said, the Watergate prosecutor, the special prosecutor, Archibald Cox, I want him fired. And the attorney general at the time, Elliot Richardson, refused and resigned. The deputy attorney general refused, William Ruckelshaus, refused and resigned. And then another DOJ official came in and fired Archie Cox. Okay, so imagine you're 26, 30 years old, you're on this Watergate team, and the president has just fired or forced the resignations of your immediate boss, the Watergate prosecutor, the AG, and the deputy AG. What on earth do you do? Now, Jill Wine-Banks told me, she said, we were working 6.5 days a week. I couldn't get a day off. But I finally got special permission to take a day off on late Saturday in late October of 1973. She said, I went up to New York City, I went to a family wedding, and when I got back at midnight, and the people who are my age will remember this, and the desk clerk handed me a handwritten message. That's the way, this is before texts and phones, kids. And the message said, the office has been seized, return to DC immediately. And she went, what on earth is happening? And she took the first, I don't know if it's a train or plane, back on the Sunday morning after the Saturday Night Massacre. And she said, we all went back, and Jim Quarles and Jill Wine-Banks both remember this similar. There's moments in the book where people actually have conflicting memories, but here's one where they remembered it the same. And they said, the group of us, this young group of prosecutors, gathered in a conference room. Jill said there was actual yellow police tape blocking off our offices, and I ripped it down. She said, and some FBI agent said to me, ma'am, I wouldn't do that. And because she's Jill, she said, yeah, I'm going to do it. This is my desk. And they're sitting there in the conference room, and they actually didn't know what the status was. They knew the AG and deputy AG and Archie Cox were gone. They didn't know if they had all been fired. They didn't know if the whole case had been closed down. They didn't know what was going on. In fact, the New York Times erroneously reported that they had all been fired. That was wrong. And as they're sitting there talking about what to do, and they have young families, and do we quit? Do we resign? Do we stay on this? Do we make a public statement? Archie Cox, who had been fired the night before, comes into the room. Now, I guess they let Cox back into the office to clean out his desk. Nowadays, they would just change your pass thing, and you wouldn't be able to buzz into the building. But Archie Cox comes into the room, and he says to them, do not give him, Nixon, do not give him what he wants. You stay here, and you finish the job. And that's what they did. They refused to quit. They, along with others, sort of pushed back against Nixon, rejected what he did, demanded that a new special prosecutor be appointed. A couple weeks later, we got a new special prosecutor, a man named Leon Jaworski. Leon Jaworski was very aggressive. He subpoenas those secret White House tapes. It goes to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court rules 9-0 against Richard Nixon, and 11 days later, Richard Nixon resigns. And so I think back to that example set by those Watergate prosecutors, by Jill, by Jim, by their colleagues. And I guess you could see it as the vestige of a bygone era and something that would never happen today, and maybe there's some validity to that. But the lesson I choose to take from that is to look at the backbone and the courage that they showed in standing up for the integrity and the independence of the Justice Department. And I don't know what's going to happen next, but whoever takes over next, I close my book with this plea that whatever president comes next, you're going to find that a lot of guardrails have been kicked down and destroyed. This one's too important. We need to restore an independent prosecutorial system. It's too damaging if we play politics with our prosecutors. So with that, I will thank you, and I will invite Dr. Dworkin up. Thank you.
Elie Honig, let me tell you that I usually don't find our guest speakers to have as much energy as I do up here. So this is great, because we're going to go through a whole bunch of stuff. We had a whole bunch of questions that came in when people registered online.
Yeah.
Got one or two that came in just this evening. So we're going to try and run through them. Give us about 20.
How much time do we have?
20, 25 minutes.
Oh, it's plenty.
Okay.
25, please. Usually at CNN, I go, how much time do we have? Like,
We want to make sure.
Can you do this in a minute 40? Yeah.
So we'll go through this. I want to ask you about presidential immunity, because we had a couple questions on that. One of the really interesting factors, and you talk about this in your book, available outside for sale, available sign. One of the interesting factors that shaped the ability of somebody investigating a presidential administration, which is the theme of your book, was the 2024 Supreme Court decision, Trump v. U.S. That was the presidential immunity case, in which, as I understand it, extended civil immunity for presidents to now include criminal immunity for official presidential action. Yes. A hypothetical came up in one of the questions, because President Trump has from time to time labeled his political opposition, usually Democrats, as terrorists. So, as the foremost legal mind in this room, is it possible, or rather, is it constitutional, for a president to label the opposing candidate as a terrorist, and because that person, that terrorist, might win an election, impose an imminent threat to the United States, and therefore order arrest, capture, killing of a terrorist?
Okay, so
is that where we are? I know that went dark really fast.
So, well, let me talk about the immunity decision, because in my second book, this is before any of the Trump indictments had come out. And I told you part of what I wrote in the book. I wrote in the book then, it's already too late. Merrick Garland and the Biden administration already wasted too much time. And I knew from my time as a prosecutor, there was no way they were going to be able to investigate, indict, deal with the immunity issue. And I said this way before it even came up. It was obviously hanging out there and obviously going to have to go up to the Supreme Court, which was obviously going to take a lot of time and probably cause the case to get basically restarted, which is exactly what happened. So I'll say this about the immunity ruling. People hate this ruling. I have my criticisms of this ruling. That said, it was completely foreseeable, and there's really nothing wrong with having some degree of immunity for the president. Okay, you have to have that, because presidents make decisions all day long, every day, that impact lives and finances and have massive consequences. And if you can indict a president for doing any old thing, we might go down a very dangerous path here, right? However, the Supreme Court drew the lines in this immunity ruling incredibly, outrageously broadly. The way they define, well, part of the thing is they drew the line so broadly. The other thing is the definitions they gave are incoherent and incomprehensible and very difficult to apply to any given circumstance. And we never got to see it all play out because the Jack Smith case ended mid litigation when Trump won the election. I think it is a very fair criticism that the immunity opinion goes too far, that it allows all these wacky circumstances, and you say maybe he has immunity. I lay out a scenario in my book that's hypothetical, and it's actually even a little crazier than that one.
I was trying to tone it down.
Yeah, and I explain how if you apply the immunity ruling a certain way, a president can get away with a heck of a lot and almost everything. So if your argument is there should be no immunity whatsoever, I think that's a losing argument. By the way, the liberals who dissented very studiously avoided saying whether they believe there should be some immunity or none at all. I think they know that it's wrong to say there should be none at all. But the way the Supreme Court did it leads to all sorts of not only problematic scenarios, but we don't know exactly. It's too hard to tell from the way they laid it out what is or is not immune. So it's going to be a big problem moving forward.
Let me switch for a moment to just the pardon power. I'm teaching American government this semester in class. We're talking about the powers of the presidency, including to pardon. From your perspective, can a president pardon himself and all the folks in his administration so that there's no need for any outside counsel, independent counsel anyway, because the president has pardoned us?
So the answer is we don't know about whether a president can pardon himself. Anyone who tells you yes he can or no he cannot is just guessing or sort of drawing inferences. We just don't know the answer to that. But everything else, the answer is, like it or not, yes. I've said that the pardon power is Donald Trump's favorite power because it's such a blunt force instrument. He doesn't need anyone's approval. You can't challenge it in court. Congress can't do anything about it unless they pass laws, but even then I don't know that that would work. It is just, I've said the pardon power is one of the few areas where the presidency works the way a kindergartner thinks the presidency works. You know, kindergartners think the president can just say, oh, ice cream for dessert, and that's the law, and everyone has to listen. But the pardon power is actually that simple. If the president says it, and that's that. Can the president issue proactive pardons to protect people? Absolutely. I'll give you a couple examples. Richard Nixon. Right? When Gerald Ford pardoned Nixon, Nixon had not been charged with anything yet. He probably would have been. I'll give you another example of a president who did what you just said, Joseph Robinette Biden. On his way out of office, he pardoned his siblings and his in-laws, I think it was 5 or 6 people total, who had not been charged with a crime. And he said, you're all protected, you can't be charged with a crime. Biden also pardoned the members of the January 6th committee. And I'm good friends with Adam Kinzinger, and he didn't want the pardon. To this day, he says, I wish Biden hadn't done that. He says, we didn't need it, and it made us look bad. And I joke with him. I say, when you get a pardon, does someone deliver it to you? Do you get a piece of paper in the mail? He always goes, shut up. So yes, but I will say, Donald Trump to a greater extent, Joe Biden to a lesser extent, have abused the pardon power to a point where virtually anything goes. Okay, other presidents, there's a long history of bad pardons in this country, but nobody has done it quite like Donald Trump is in a league of his own, okay? And Joe Biden's probably runner-up by a good distance. But you can't excuse Joe Biden pardoning his son, and not just his son and his siblings and their in-laws, but I mean, he pardoned the judge in Pennsylvania who was taking money in order to place kids in child abuse facility, child care facilities to protect them from abuse. I mean, disgraceful pardons. And Donald Trump is just, it's pay to play. Right? I mean, New York Times just did a great piece on this. Anyone who has access, anyone who donates, anyone who invests, if you can get close to the president. I have to tell you one pardon story because it's too good to not tell. I sort of just gave it away a little bit. There was an individual in the 1860s named Moses Robinette who was a Union, he wasn't a soldier for the Union, but he worked in the mess hall or something. And he got in a fight during the Civil War with another Union soldier and stabbed him, didn't kill him, and he got convicted and sentenced to whatever in jail, Moses Robinette. Abraham Lincoln pardoned Moses Robinette. Now, does anyone know who Moses Robinette's great-great-grandson is? I just gave it away. Joe Biden is Moses. And so I have determined that Moses Robinette and Hunter Biden are the only time we've ever had a great-great-great-grandfather and great-great-great-grandson both receive presidential pardons. Use that on Jeopardy.
This is going to make you hate at cocktail parties, that kind of stuff. We did have a couple of questions. I've tried to intersperse them here that were not focused, more focused on you as a personality.
Yeah, that's more fun.
So what is a typical day for you when there's no breaking story, when you're not running out to the federal courthouse? Do you work out? Are you reading 9 papers before 6 a.m.?
Yes and yes. There's 3 kinds of days that you can have at CNN. There's your more or less when according to plan day. And today would be a day that falls into that because we knew that Nicolas Maduro had a court appearance. It was pre-scheduled. We knew when it was going to be. Okay, even with that, I got picked up at 5 in the morning. I went up to CNN. I did a segment at 7. I did a segment at 9. I did a segment in the 10 o'clock hour on International. I was supposed to do a segment at 11, but it got washed out because Trump rambled on for 2 hours in his cabinet meeting. I did a segment at 1. I drove down here, did a segment at Rowan at 5, and may have a segment, I don't think so, at 9. But it all kind of went according to plan, and that's pretty rare. Then there's the day of complete washout, where you think you're going to have a lot to do, or you're booked on a bunch of shows and something horrible happens, a natural disaster, a mass shooting, a major international development, and you're just washed out. You're just canceled. Sometimes it's fine. Like if you haven't left home, you're like, okay, that's fine. But sometimes, you'll go into the city and you'll go through all your prep and you'll have your segment ready and you've gone through makeup and all this stuff and you're ready, and then something happens like, so sorry, we have to cancel you. But it's part of the job. If you can't deal with that, you can't do this job. And then there's the third type of day, which is the holy crap, where the hell are you? How quick can you get in front of a camera day? Which those happen too. I have a studio in my house, and so that happens a lot. And I will tell you, my world record is last summer, I was in the pool, this town pool, which is 2 blocks from my house, literally in the pool, and I heard my phone ringing from the bench where it was, and I hopped out and I saw it was CNN. They're like, where are you? And I was on camera, on air, 18 minutes later. I went home in my car, it took 2 minutes, I threw on something, I always keep I think I'm saying. So there's all different days. It's a very unpredictable gig, but it's a blast.
There seems to be a playbook for any administration that finds itself under investigation from an outside appointed thing. Basically, you try to shut it down. If it starts scaring people, you try to shut it down. When you're not successful at that, you attack the investigators as bloodthirsty partisans. This is just political. In your book, you've talked about the American history of how long we've seen this kind of playbook time and time and time again, really since the 1870s. I want to offer you a chance to kind of show that it's not just since Watergate that we're talking about here.
So the book starts in earnest with Watergate, but I do go back. The first one of these outside prosecutor cases was Ulysses S. Grant after the Civil War. It was very Civil War-y. He appointed a guy to investigate the tax collector who was collecting tax from whiskey distillers in the Missouri region, was taking kickbacks and stuff. But a lot of the stuff that we've come to recognize, and we don't like it, but a lot of the stuff that we've seen recent presidents do, Ulysses S. Grant did. He tried to fire the prosecutor. He undermined him in the press. He complained the press was coming after him. The press said he's circling the wagons and all this. So Donald Trump was not the first person to use the phrase witch hunt. Bill Clinton's, not him himself, but Bill Clinton's handlers called what Ken Starr was doing a witch hunt. So I'm not saying that to bless anything that's been done, but this playbook has existed for a long time. As I said before, Donald Trump has taken it to a whole new level where a lot of presidents have undermined, at times obstructed these investigations, but Trump now has made clear nothing will even get off the ground. It's a miracle that the Mueller was appointed during Donald Trump's first term, a few months in. And Mueller, as much as Trump undermined and obstructed Mueller, he let him finish his job. He let him do it. He let him indict. He ended up pardoning these people, but he didn't shut that down. Now, nothing is going to get. Pam Bondi will not allow it. Donald Trump will not allow it. And the moment when I knew that was when the Signal scandal happened. You remember this? Mike Waltz, J.D. Vance, all these guys were communicating about war plans on Signal. Anytime we've had this kind of breach of classified information, it's been at least a massive investigation and sometimes an indictment. Hillary Clinton has her emails on a private server, massive investigation. Joe Biden has documents in his garage, massive investigation. Donald Trump has documents at Mar-a-Lago, massive investigation and indictment. And Pam Bondi came out on day 2 or 3 after this scandal broke and said, someone asked her, are you investigating? She said, no, there's no crime here. And you all should just be celebrating the fact that the strike we did was successful. And I said right there, I said, oh, okay, now I see. There will be no inward-looking investigation. And that is different than Nixon. That is different than Clinton. That is different than Trump 1.0.
We obviously had, as you might imagine, a whole bunch of questions about the Trump administration, your thoughts, which you've already shared a lot. This actually was one that perhaps takes it from a little more creative way. When historians write the book about the second Trump administration and a focus on its legal battles, when that book is written, what should the title be?
This is good. So a good friend of mine is working on a book on that right now. And I keep saying to her, how on earth are you going to do this book? Because there's unavoidably a 4 to 5 month period from when your book locks. So you write your book, you hand it in, you edit it a million times, but it has to lock because they have to physically send it out to the printer. There's only a couple of those printers in the country. It takes 4 or 5 months to produce it, to publicize it and all that. I say, how could you possibly do a book about this DOJ? Because if it locks today, how many things are going to happen between today and 4 months from now when it goes on sale? It's going to be hopelessly outdated. There's another book that's coming out from a great Washington Post reporter over the summer, Devlin Barrett. They're called like something like, so one of them I think is called Revenge, Department of Retribution. That's a pretty good title. My friend's book I think is tentatively titled Injustice. My editor, I'll just give you a little BTS on the book industry here. For one of my books, for the first book, which was about Bill Barr, I wanted to call it Injustice, right? It's a sort of a pun, like an injustice, and I'm taking you inside the Justice Department. And he's a very blunt guy. He goes, no, that's bad. And I said, why? He goes, it's a vague title, whatever. And then this is how titles get made. And I go, well, how do we do this? Do you have like consultants or something that figure this out? And he goes, no, just, I don't know, give me some ideas. And I typed out like 8 or 9 titles for him, one of which was Hatchet Man. And he just immediately goes, that's it, Hatchet Man, we're done, that's your title. I like the direct, strong titles. I don't like the injustice-y titles. But yeah, Department of Retribution is good, and Department of Injustice is good, if a little hacky.
We wanted to stick with books because we had another question, more about a personal view here. Besides your book, available for sale outside after the thing, besides your book, what 3 books have had the most influence on your life?
Oh my gosh, what a great question. Okay, number 1 is the book that I require my undergrads to read at Rutgers. I read it, I've read it 20 times now. It's called Devil in the Grove. It's the story of the young Thurgood Marshall. So we all know he became a justice. It's all before he became a Supreme Court justice. Thurgood Marshall was the most courageous lawyer I've ever seen. He went into the Deep South in the 40s and 50s. He was nearly lynched, like really within a couple minutes of being lynched in one case, and he defended people, primarily black people, who had been wrongly accused of murder and were being sentenced to death. It is an unbelievable story. It's an important part of our history. People don't understand this part of our history or know that Thurgood Marshall had this background. It's also an important reminder. So many things. I use this as a teaching tool to say, so many things that were done back then in the 40s and 50s would be completely unconstitutional, would be unthinkable to happen now. So that's one. Let me think. I am in the middle of reading the trilogy by Rick Atkinson about the American Revolutionary War. I forget what they're all 3 called, but they're all very big, imposing books. But look, I know as much about the Revolutionary War as the average person. Now I know a little more, but I mean, we're coming up on the 250th, and I just find it's fascinating, but it's also inspiring. And look, listen, where did the war really turn? New Jersey. They had us on the run, and we beat them at Princeton and Trenton and Monmouth and all this, and someone's disagreeing with me. I think the tide of the war... Okay, Saratoga, fine, New York. But the tide turned in New Jersey. I take a lot of pride in that. And I think when you go back and read about the leaders of this country, the people who crafted it, it helps you sort of conceptualize and understand what's happening today. What's a third book that I love? Those 2 are good. I'm going to try to think of one that's not just a legal book. What's another one that I loved? I'll give you a great book. It's what the heck is it called? Den of Thieves. Okay, just reminded me. When I got the job at the Southern District of New York, it's about the prosecutions that my office, the SDNY, did in the 80s of the Wall Street barons, of Michael Milken, of these guys who were ripping off people for millions and billions of dollars by selling bogus penny stocks. And I'm reading this in the time period after I have the job, but before I've started there. And I was so inspired by that. These people going after the richest, most powerful people, a bunch of prosecutors like me making piddly little salaries, taking down these Wall Street titans, that really inspired me.
Thank you for that. We did get a question about ICE and the conflict between states and the federal government. New Jersey just passed a law saying that ICE officers can no longer operate in New Jersey while wearing masks. We have demasked as a state law. If ICE refuses to do this, citing federal authority, who wins this kind of legal battle?
So first of all, I think it's ridiculous that ICE wears masks when they're doing their jobs. If you ask why, the answer from the bosses is, well, to protect these agents. Let me tell you something. I did cases, there's people in this audience right now who took down way more dangerous people than any of these people who ICE is arresting who didn't have to mask themselves. Our law enforcement agents should not be masking themselves, period. Now, when it comes to this conflict between states and the feds, the states don't have to cooperate with the feds. And so if you're a state level law enforcement authority and you say, if the ICE calls us and they say, hey, Glassboro County Prosecutor, Glassboro's not a county, Gloucester County Prosecutor's Office. We're looking for John Smith, and we think you might have an address. Do you have it? You don't have to give it to them. What you cannot do is get in their way or obstruct them. And so you can't say, well, ICE, you're not allowed to do your business on this street, or you can't make arrests in this area. That's sort of the dividing line. And I think if New Jersey has a law saying, I don't believe ultimately the state has the authority to dictate the way in which the feds execute law enforcement. I don't think those, this is one where I will tell you I don't know how this case will come out. I want New Jersey to win this one, but we have to sometimes separate what we want from what we think is likely. I would like New Jersey to win. If I had to guess, I would guess New Jersey will not win because the feds have their own authority, and you can't have, what would happen, think about the road this would go down if the states could micromanage the way that the feds enforce federal law. It would lead to chaos.
We've got last two questions, okay? Penultimate question. We live in a world, it's about the timing of prosecutorial decisions close to an election. We live in a world in which some have called, certainly in political science, we have a world of a permanent campaign. People are always going. So does it make sense in this kind of political world for the Department of Justice to have a rule about avoiding prosecutorial announcements shortly before an election when it's always kind of ripe? I mean, what's the difference between 1 week and 6 months in these kinds of announcements?
It's a great question, and it's definitely true that we are in a constant campaign cycle. I'm hosting, if anyone doesn't get enough of me tonight, I'm hosting SiriusXM from 9 to 12 tomorrow morning, if you want 3 hours more of me. But one of my guests is going to be talking about Democratic prospects for 2028. So I plead guilty to playing it, but they're all maneuvering as well. I mean, this is the way it works. DOJ has, this is a little bit misunderstood. You will hear people talk about this DOJ 60-day rule or 90-day rule, that DOJ doesn't do things within 60 or 90 days of an election that might impact that election. It's a little unclear. It's not a hard and fast rule, but it's generally a practice that says we ought to try to avoid doing things that we have some choice over too close to an election, because we don't want to tip the balance of an election. And if you want two examples of where that was violated, I point you first to, where this is going, Jim Comey, right? Right before the 20, and by the way, I argue they should. The Comey example is why we need special counsel. They blew it. They should have appointed special counsel. There was an obvious reason to do it. Loretta Lynch, who I like, failed, and instead of appointing a special counsel, she said, I'm going to defer to the FBI. And let me tell you, Jim Comey gets criticized very harshly in this book. When you give Jim Comey power, he's going to use it. Jim Comey ends up making it up as he goes along, plays himself into this box, and makes these announcements, two of them, on the eve of the 2016 election. And I do a dive in the book into whether that actually swung the election. And my short answer is probably. We can't know for sure, but various people have run data on it. Probably. I'll tell you one person who definitely thinks that Jim Comey cost Hillary Clinton the election, Hillary Clinton. And I know that for a fact because she was on CNN a couple weeks before the 2024 election. And our anchor, Caitlin Collins, asked her, how do you feel about your party and Kamala Harris's chances heading into this election? And Hillary did not miss a beat. She didn't mince a word. She said, well, she doesn't have Jim Comey waiting to jump out and kneecap her, so that's good. Okay, so that's one good example of why we shouldn't have prosecutors, making announcements that they can avoid on the eve of the election. The other example, I point you to Jack Smith. Now, look, I know that it violates liberal dogma to criticize Jack Smith. He's held up as this saint-like figure who never did anything wrong. Au contraire, read my book. Jack Smith, the 4 biggest cases Jack Smith ever did before the Trump cases were rejected by judges and juries for overcharging, prosecutorial overreach, or misconduct. That's a fact, okay? No one will talk about this. That's a fact. In this case, okay, so here we are. The immunity decision has happened, right? And now it's October of 2024. We're within 40 days of the election. And the case comes back down to the trial court. And now it's time for motions. Okay, motions. When you do motions in court, there's every prosecutor and every defense lawyer in this room will tell you, defense lawyers make the motion first, then the prosecutor responds. That's what the rules say. That's how it's been done in every single case I've ever seen. Defense makes their motion, prosecutor responds. The thing is, though, given where we were in the calendar, that was going to mean that Donald Trump's team got to make their motion before the election, but the prosecution wouldn't get to answer till after. And what did Jack Smith do? He went to the judge and said, "Judge, I want to reverse that. I want to go first. The rules say I go second, but I want to go first." And the judge said, this is, quote, procedurally irregular, but the judge often gave Jack Smith whatever he wanted. Let Jack Smith do that. And then Jack Smith says, also, Judge, I want to file a brief that's quadruple the maximum length. The maximum length, I think, was 45 pages. I want to file a 180-page brief. And he files a brief, 180 pages of every piece of dirt that he's dug up on Donald Trump. Why did he do that? Why was he in such a rush? Why was he reversing the written rules of procedure? Because he wanted to get that out before the election. There's no other explanation for it. And I think that is unforgivable on Jack Smith's part. So I know liberals don't like to hear it. Jack Smith is this saint, but trust me, read my book and you will think very differently about Jack Smith.
Our final question is one we traditionally ask all of the people who get to stand on this stage. Mr. Honig, what do you know now that you wish you knew when you were in college?
Nothing. I knew everything.
What do you know now that you wish you knew when you were there?
Okay, students. Where's just show of hands how many people are current? Oh my God, I love this. Okay, students, let me tell you, your generation has an outrageous amount of pressure imposed by maybe your parents. I'm a parent of 2 college students, maybe by yourselves, maybe by your teachers, maybe by your peers, maybe just by society at large, that you have to have it all figured out right now. I teach undergrads at Rutgers, and I'm going to do this, and I'm going to go get that degree, and then I'm going to get this internship, and then I'm going to get this job, and then I'm going to go to this law school, and then I'm going to work at this firm, right? Let me tell you something. The phrase career path is very misleading because a path suggests like a linear, straight thing. Your career paths will not be paths. They will not be straight. And they will be marked by rejection. They will be marked by failure. Mine certainly was. I'll tell you one specific example. I was desperate to become a DOJ prosecutor. I had been at a big firm for 3.5 years, and I applied to my hometown U.S. Attorney's Office, the Philly one, Eastern District. My wife was already at New Jersey. I didn't want to double up, so okay. But I applied to the Eastern District of Pennsylvania, the Philadelphia U.S. Attorney, and I'll tell you honestly, I was like, they're gonna hire. I'm a South Jersey kid. I went to Harvard Law. I'm at this super elite firm. They rejected me. Then I applied to Brooklyn, the Eastern District of New York. They rejected me. And then I didn't know what to do because I had to come up to this office. And I didn't even think the Southern District of New York was a possibility because this is the gold standard. This is the hardest office to get hired on. You all know how this ends, but I had a friend who once said to me, how on earth, getting hired at the SDNY, rejected everywhere else, is like somehow you lost the silver and the bronze, but you won the gold. But the day I was going up for my final round interview at the SDNY, we had to submit 2 letters of recommendation. Not directly, the person had to send it into the SDNY. And the SDNY administrator calls me and she says, we have one of your letters, but not the other. And I said, what do I do? She said, just have that person send you the letter on email and print it out and bring it with you. Okay. So I do that, I print it out. It's from a very fancy partner at my very fancy law firm. I'll just tell you, all you need to know about this guy is he says the word who, whom, or when. Okay, he's that kind of guy. Great guy, I did a big case with him, whatever. So I'm on New Jersey Transit, heading north into the city, and I got this letter. And I'm probably not supposed to see it, but do I look? Would you look? I did. And by the way, this letter still exists somewhere in DOJ's archive. Someone should FOIA this. And the letter begins something like this. I don't have the exact, but it was something like this. To the Southern District of New York, I write in support of Elie Honig's application. While Elie is not among the most intellectual of associates, and I'm like, oh my God, he's saying I'm dumb. What do we do? Do I throw this out the window? Do I pretend I never got this? What the? And it goes on to say, I was able to observe him in many real life settings, and he's great on his feet, and he works really well with witnesses, and he's good in the courtroom, and he's great, he's a pleasure to work with. So basically, he's dumb, but you'll like him. Well, the punchline here is the US attorney at that moment happened to be a guy who you could not have possibly written a better letter for, right? A lot of times, traditionally, the US attorney in the SDNY is Yale and Harvard and went to Cho, all that. This guy was like he was like one of us, right? Like, a normal guy who went to a normal school, and you could not possibly have written a better letter for that US attorney. And so I got that job. And there were a lot of really frustrating failures along the way before that. So to bring it around, students, have some grace for yourselves, accept failure, take it and move on, and be persistent. It's not going to be a straight path. You're going to get there. Take the opportunities as they come.
On that note, let's thank Elie Honig for a wonderful conversation. Oh, for you, sir, you can be the first one on your block in Metuchen to have your genuine, you can put it on.
We're gonna put it on.
Oh, that's awesome. Let me just show everybody the back, which says, right back, Workforce Development for Democracy, which is what we do here. So thank you, Mr. Honig.
Hold this.
I will hold the jacket. You can put it on.
Hope it fits. I told you my size, right?
Yeah. We got the right size. This is so cool. Nobody puts the shirt on, right? Like, the governor didn't do this when he was here. The Congress, that's awesome. Ladies and gentlemen.
Nice.
It looks great. Thank you, Mr. Honig. If you could just stay in your seats for just one moment, we're going to get him out to the table so we can sign your books. If we can form an orderly line. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming out. We will keep you on our list. We'll let you know about other things coming up. And we graciously and generously and really appreciate you being here tonight. One more round of applause for Elie Honig. Thank you. Thank you so much.